So, um, Albert Einstein, a Silicon Valley billionaire and an Eastern mystic.
Right.
They all somehow figured out the exact same, like, loophole in human physics. And it's basically this: the thought in your head and the actual physical movement of your hand are the exact same substance. There's literally no separation.
I mean, it sounds like an absolute paradox when you just say it out loud like that.
Yeah, it totally does.
Because, we are so deeply conditioned to believe that the mind and the body exist in two completely different realms. Like, they operate on this strict delay.
Right, like the brain is this isolated command center. And I bet you, the listener, probably have this exact same mental model, right?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone does.
You believe that before you make a move, whether that's launching a massive new business venture or just sending a slightly risky email to your boss, you have to call this emergency meeting of the internal committee.
Yes, the grand convening of the mental board of directors. And, I mean, let's be honest, it is a packed room up there. It's so packed. Exactly. You've got the anxiety delegate sitting right at the head of the mahogany table.
And we're always running a meeting.
Always. And the perfectionist is there taking, like, copious color-coded notes. And then the historian is dragging in these massive filing cabinets full of every single social misstep you've made dating back to, like, 2018.
The historian is the worst one.
So brutal. And you just sit there completely paralyzed, deeply convinced that you cannot possibly take a single physical step out into the real world until this entire committee reaches a unanimous, crystal clear consensus.
Which never happens, by the way.
Right. Never. But we consider this agonizing process the hallmark of being a responsible, rational adult.
We do. We really do. But the premise we are unpacking in our deep dive today fundamentally dismantles the entire internal committee.
It fires the whole board.
Completely. It exposes that whole think first, act later routine not just as a bad habit, but as a complete biological and physical illusion.
Which is wild. It really is. The source materials we're exploring today bridge Marc Andreessen's pretty brutal venture capital philosophy from early 2026, the ancient mysticism of Sadhguru, and the literal physics of relativity.
Quite the trio.
Yeah, and the core argument tying them all together is that separating thought from action isn't just inefficient, it is biologically false.
Which, I mean, that is such a massive claim. Because when I first looked at these concepts in the reading, my immediate reaction was just pure defense.
Sure.
I thought, wait, if I don't think before I act, I'm just going to be a chaotic mess.
Yeah.
It flies in the face of literally everything we're taught in our highly optimized modern self-care culture.
It definitely threatens the status quo.
But I'm telling you, by the time we finish this deep dive, your entire baseline for what it means to figure things out is going to be ripped completely down to the studs. So let's start with the brick that gets thrown right through the window of our overthinking culture. Marc Andreessen.
Right. So for some context, Andreessen is the guy who co-founded Netscape back in the 90s.
The browser wars.
Exactly. He effectively helped build the visual architecture of the internet so normal human beings could actually use it. And since then, he's been one of the most aggressive, prolific venture capitalists in the world.
Writing massive checks.
Right. And in early 2026, he dropped this viral, aggressively simple statement that really acts as like ground zero for this entire philosophy we're talking about.
He said, and I quote, I love this, he said, I don't introspect, I just do.
I mean, it's a completely jarring thing to hear.
It is.
It lands almost like a provocation. And to understand why it feels so abrasive to us, we really have to look at the psychological water we are swinging in right now.
Oh, the water is completely saturated with therapy speak.
Right.
We are living in an era of like performative reflection. I mean, you can't even open LinkedIn without seeing someone write a 6-paragraph dissertation about what a dropped Zoom call taught them about their inner child's fear of abandonment.
Exactly. It's everywhere.
We have morning pages, we have ritualized shadow work, we have these guided gratitude journals with highly specific prompts.
That you feel guilty if you don't fill out.
Totally. You feel like you're required to fill them out before you are even legally allowed to drink your morning coffee.
Yeah.
We have literally turned deep, agonizing reflection into a moral imperative.
We have. It is marketed as a hard prerequisite for doing literally anything.
Yes.
We have commodified the hesitation. Society has constructed this incredibly rigid narrative that action, if it isn't preceded by all this agonizing introspection, is inherently reckless.
Right. If you just do something, you're impulsive.
Exactly. We fetishize the process of thinking. We are taught to believe in this very clean, linear sequence. Like, first, You retreat inward.
Hold the committee meeting.
Right, hold the meeting, you ponder all the variables, you wait for absolute clarity to arrive, like a light bulb physically switching on over your head in a cartoon.
Ding.
Yeah, ding. And then, and only then, are you permitted to execute the external move.
It's like we've installed a bureaucratic zoning committee in our own prefrontal cortex.
A zoning committee, I love that.
Right. Because we literally feel like we have to file an environmental impact report with ourselves before we're allowed to send a calendar invite.
Let me just check my Notion board first.
Exactly. Wait, if I send this email at 3:00 p.m. on a Friday, does it project too much eagerness? Let me consult my journal. Let me do a tarot pull.
It is profoundly exhausting.
So exhausting. And I think that's exactly why Andreessen's statement feels so offensive to the modern ear. It's a blatant, unapologetic rejection of the zoning committee.
But here is where we really have to be extremely precise, because it is so easy to misinterpret what he's saying.
How so?
Well, people hear it and think he's just advocating for blind impulsivity, like just act like a maniac. But he isn't actually rejecting the act of thinking. He is rejecting the artificial boundary we've placed between the thinking and the doing.
He's challenging the sequencing.
Exactly, the order of operations.
Right, let me push back on that for a second because I want to make sure I'm fully getting the mechanics of this.
Sure, go for it.
If the linear sequence, where thinking is step A and acting is step B, if that is wrong, then how are we supposed to conceptualize our own minds?
That's the big question.
Because my entire life, I've viewed my brain as a command setter. You know, the general sits in the bunker, drafts the orders, and then radios them down to the body to execute.
Yeah.
If that's a false model, what is the true model?
To map out the true model, we actually have to step completely outside of psychology.
Okay. Where are we going?
We have to look at physics.
Oh.
Specifically, Albert Einstein's theory of relativity.
Okay, this was the part of the source material that absolutely broke my brain.
Yeah.
E=mc².
The big one.
Yeah. Even if you completely bombed high school physics, you know the equation. But we usually just think of it as a math problem that, like, helped build nuclear reactors. We definitely don't think of it as a psychological framework.
Right, but what Einstein actually did with that equation was dissolve a massive category error in human understanding.
A category error. Okay, explain that.
So, before 1905, classical physics operated under the strict assumption that mass and energy were two completely different categories of reality. They were in separate files.
Completely unrelated.
Right. Mass was stuff. It was tangible matter, a desk, a planet, an apple.
Things you can touch.
Exactly. And energy was activity. It was heat, light, velocity. They were fundamentally different things.
Treated like apples and oranges. You couldn't, like, turn an apple into velocity.
Exactly. But then Einstein comes along and mathematically proves that mass isn't just stuff and energy isn't just activity.
Right.
They are interchangeable expressions of the exact same underlying reality. Matter is just incredibly tightly packed energy, and energy is just liberated matter.
He dissolved the boundary between the object and the action.
He did. And if we apply that exact physical principle to the human mind, which is what this entire philosophy we're discussing does, it completely changes the definition of a thought.
Okay, yes. There are two sentences in the text that lay this out perfectly, and they are, thought is action in latency. Action is thought made visible.
Those two sentences are the bedrock of this entire deep dive. Thought is action in latency.
Let's really linger on that word, though.
Yeah.
Latency.
That's a great word.
What does latency actually mean on a biological, mechanical level when we are talking about human behavior? Because I hear latent and I immediately think, oh, like a computer buffering or a bad internet connection.
That's actually a decent starting point. But let's go deeper into the physical reality of it in the brain. Latency refers to a state of potential that has not yet crossed the threshold into the observable world.
Okay.
Think of the neurology. A thought is not a ghost hovering above your brain.
Right, it's not a spirit.
No, a thought is a physical, electrical action potential firing across synapses. It is a biological event.
So it's already a physical thing.
Exactly. So when the text says thought is action in latency, it means that a thought is not a different substance than an action. It is the exact same electrical impulse. It just hasn't cascaded down your nervous system to move your vocal cords or your fingertips yet.
Whoa. Okay, so wait. If thought is literally just latent action, if it's the exact same substance just trapped inside the skull, does that mean overthinking is essentially hoarding potential energy?
Yes.
Like, are we just packing more and more combustible material into a tiny space without any release valve until the pressure is so high the system just freezes?
That is precisely what is happening. When you endlessly introspect, when you hold 50 internal committee meetings about one single decision, you are accumulating latent action.
Winding the spring.
Yes, you are winding a physical spring tighter and tighter, but refusing to let the mechanism release. And because thought and action are one continuous electrical and physical phenomenon, refusing to act means you are violently interrupting the natural flow of your own nervous system.
That makes so much sense. We treat thought like a ghostly precursor.
We do?
We treat it like this ethereal spirit that haunts the machinery of our brain, whispering instructions, and the meat machine of our body isn't allowed to move until the ghost finishes its monologue. But the reality is, the ghost is the machine. The thinking and the doing are one continuous physiological event.
They are inextricably linked. There is no separation. And to see how this physically manifests, we have to look at environments where the speed of reality is simply too fast for the internal committee to even exist.
Right, we have to look at high performers in motion. Which brings us to the jazz musician analogy from the source text.
Oh, I love this one.
I absolutely love this because it takes all this abstract physics we've been talking about and puts it in a dimly lit, crowded club.
It grounds it.
Yeah. So picture the scene for a second. You have a jazz quartet. The drummer is keeping this frantic, completely unpredictable, syncopated time.
Sweating over the kit.
Totally. The bassist is walking this chaotic line, and the pianist is in the middle of a blistering, improvised solo.
Now, if you watch that pianist's hands, the separation between thought and action has entirely vanished.
Right.
The pianist does not think of the next note, send it up to the committee for approval, lock in the decision, and then command their fingers to physically play it.
They literally couldn't. The music is moving at like 160 beats per minute.
Exactly.
If they tried to insert a conscious decision-making process between the thought and the action, the song would derail instantly. The speed of the environment makes the linear sequence physically impossible.
It breaks the model. In neurobiology, there is actually a term for this. It's called transient hypofrontality.
Transient hypofrontality.
Right. It's what happens during flow states. The prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for that agonizing, deliberate internal committee thinking we've been talking about, it temporarily downregulates.
It quiets down.
It goes offline. And the deeper, faster, motor-driven parts of the brain take over entirely. The thinking is occurring in the fingertips.
Wow.
The action is the thought manifesting in real time.
The action is the thought. And what's wild is that this scales up. It's not just a quirk of playing the piano or playing sports.
No, not at all.
If we go back to Marc Andreessen and the early days of Netscape, he applied this exact same jazz improvisation principle, but at the scale of a multi-million-dollar enterprise.
Yes.
We are talking about the mid-1990s here. The internet was a lawless, completely uncharted digital frontier.
There were zero playbooks.
None. And Netscape did not dominate that early frontier by locking themselves in a boardroom to execute perfect, uninterrupted introspection.
They didn't have time.
Exactly. They didn't spend 3 years mapping out a flawless theoretical user journey before writing a single line of code. They won the browser war against massive, established giants by shipping the product, watching it break in real time, iterating on the fly, and shipping it again.
Faster than anyone else could even convene a meeting.
Right. The thinking did not precede the doing. The thinking emerged within the doing.
The doing was the thinking.
But, okay, I have to stop you there because my anxiety delegate is screaming right now.
I can hear it.
If the thinking emerges within the doing,
Hmm?
isn't that utterly terrifying?
Oh, absolutely.
If you're a founder or, just someone trying to change careers and you adopt this mindset, you are essentially building the airplane while you are in free fall.
You are.
You're jumping out of the sky and just hoping you figure out aerodynamics before you hit the concrete.
It is absolutely terrifying to the intellect. That fear you're describing is completely valid. And I think it explains exactly why we cling to introspection like a life raft.
It feels safe.
It feels incredibly safe to stay on the ground inside the hangar, drafting beautiful theoretical blueprints of the airplane.
Yeah, drawing the wings.
Right. But the brutal reality of a complex, rapidly changing environment, whether that's the 90s internet or the hyper-connected world we live in right now, is that the blueprint is obsolete the moment the ink dries.
Because the wind changes.
Exactly. You cannot understand aerodynamics on a whiteboard. Aerodynamics can only be understood by interacting with the wind.
Interacting with the wind. I love that.
The friction of reality is the only thing that actually provides true data.
Interacting with the friction. That is such a crucial shift in perspective. But okay, if moving fast and interacting with the friction of the real world is the secret to high performance, why do we stubbornly refuse to do it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Why do we cling to the idea that we need to sit cross-legged and do the inner work before we take a step?
Well, this leads us to one of the most piercing psychological insights of this whole concept. The source text calls it the masquerade of introspection.
The masquerade. This is where it gets really uncomfortable.
This is where we have to be ruthlessly honest with ourselves. Because the vast majority of what we label as introspection, agonizing over underlying motives, playing out hypotheticals, trying to mentally model every possible future outcome, it is not self-improvement.
No.
It is simply procrastination dressed up in a very sophisticated disguise.
And it's this self-improvement costume.
Exactly.
And it's such a brilliant, seductive disguise because it feels incredibly productive.
It tricks the brain.
It totally does. When you sit down at your desk and make a meticulous 3-page pros and cons list, when you highlight the risks in red and the benefits in green, your brain floods your system with dopamine.
You feel great.
You feel like a responsible, highly strategic adult. You feel like you are doing the hard work.
But you aren't doing the work. You are mimicking action.
Wow. Mimicking action.
You are generating the internal chemical reward of progress without actually exposing yourself to the physical risk of real-world feedback.
You're safe.
Right. You are staying safely within the confines of the internal committee room where no one can reject you, no market can crash on your idea, and no prototype can fail.
Okay, I have an analogy for this, and I want you to tell me if I'm hitting the mark here.
Let's hear.
It's exactly like playing a life simulation video game, like The Sims or some massive RPG.
Okay, I'm with you.
You boot up the game, right? And you spend 5 straight hours in the character creation screen.
Oh, yeah.
You are meticulously modeling every single possible feature of your avatar. You're tweaking their cheekbones, adjusting their charisma stats. You're reading online wikis about the optimal skill tree to unlock and picking out the perfect starting outfit.
Spending hours on the hair.
Hours. Yeah. And you feel incredibly busy and engaged. You feel like a master strategist. But you haven't actually hit start game.
Right.
You haven't played a single agonizing second of the actual game.
You're completely avoiding the game. That is a perfect analogy. And the danger of the character creation screen is that it creates the illusion of clarity.
Oh, wow.
We tell ourselves, I just need a little more time to figure out my stats, and then I'll have the clarity to start.
Just like one more tweak.
Right. But the framework we're discussing is incredibly strict on this point. Real clarity does not precede motion.
It doesn't.
It is a byproduct of it. Waiting for clarity to arrive before you act is a fundamental structural trap.
Because you can't get clarity on a dynamic system while standing completely still.
You just can't.
Okay, so if modeling the future is a trap, how do we actually break out of the character creation screen? To answer that, we have to take a pretty wild detour away from the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, straight into Eastern mysticism.
It's a fascinating pivot.
It really is. And this is where Sadhguru enters the picture.
Right, so Sadhguru is a prominent yogi and mystic. He's operating in an entirely different hemisphere of human experience than a venture capitalist like Andreessen.
Worlds apart.
Completely. Yet he makes a stark assertion that perfectly mirrors the physics of action we've been discussing. He says, and this is a direct quote, "The past is not real. The future is not real. Only this moment is real."
Now, I know what you, the listener, are probably thinking right now, because I thought it too when I read it.
What's that?
It sounds like generic throw-pillow self-help advice.
Live, laugh, love in the now.
Exactly. Live in the now. But when you actually deconstruct the mechanics of what he's saying, it is ruthless.
It is.
He is saying that literally everything outside of the physical present moment is mental cinema.
Let's unpack the neurology of that mental cinema because it's so important. Think about what a memory actually is.
Okay.
Memory is not a physical place you can visit. It is not a hard drive you are accessing in your brain.
Right.
When you remember something, your brain is actively reconstructing a narrative in the present moment about an event that no longer exists in physical reality.
It's a reconstruction.
Yes, it is a ghost story you are telling your own nervous system right now.
That is so spooky, but so true.
Yeah.
And anticipation or anxiety about what's coming is just a science fiction story about something that does not yet exist.
Exactly.
So when you are introspecting in that agonizing way, when you're trying to figure out your next move by analyzing your past mistakes and predicting future disasters, what you're really doing is sitting alone in a dark theater.
Eating popcorn by yourself.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And you're screening these two films on a continuous loop, the ghost film of the past and the hologram film of the future.
And you are mistaking the projection on the screen for the physical reality of the theater itself. Sadhguru's prescription is not to sit in the theater and try to analyze the cinematography of your past failures.
He's not a film critic.
No. And he isn't telling you to write a better script for the future hologram either. His prescription is to stand up and walk out of the theater.
Walk out of this cinema.
Yes, it is a demand for radical, unfiltered presence.
Dropping the commentary.
Oh.
Escaping the cinema. But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Please do.
Because if I just completely ignore the past, I feel like I'm going to walk into traffic.
Right, you'll get hit by a bus.
Seriously. If the past isn't real, how do we learn? Let's go back to Netscape for a minute. Didn't they have to remember what broke in their code yesterday in order to iterate on it today?
Of course.
So how do you reconcile the absolute biological necessity of learning from mistakes with this sweeping, mystical statement that the past is not real? Are we just advocating for corporate amnesia?
That is the essential friction point, and it's where most people completely misunderstand the concept.
Okay, correct me.
The argument is not advocating for amnesia. It is not saying you ignore objective data. The crucial distinction here is between the data and the commentary.
The commentary. Okay, explain how that works in practice. How do I separate the two?
Let's use your code example. If a piece of software code broke yesterday, the broken code itself is a present moment reality.
Right, it's right there on the screen.
Exactly. You can look at the server logs right now. The error exists in front of you. You look at the constraint and you act to fix it. That is dealing with data.
Okay, I followed up.
What you do not do is sit back, look at the broken code, and run a mental cinema feature about how this bug proves you are a total imposter.
Oh.
You don't screen the film about how this reminds you of a similar failure you had 3 years ago, or how it guarantees your startup will run out of funding in 6 months.
I do that all the time.
We all do. The amygdala in your brain desperately wants to tag that broken code with massive emotional weight and project it into the future. That emotional narrative is the ghost story.
That makes so much sense. You separate the objective mechanics of the present from the emotional baggage of the past.
Exactly.
The data is a tool you use right now, but the narrative is just this incredibly heavy coat you're wearing for literally no reason.
Take the code off.
Yeah, you don't psychoanalyze the bug, you just fix the bug.
Precisely. You interact with the present reality of the constraint without carrying the historical baggage of how the constraint got there.
Right.
And this brings us to why this radical mystic presence isn't just some path to spiritual enlightenment. According to the text, it is the ultimate cutthroat competitive advantage in business today.
Which takes us right back to the modern era, because we live in an age of infinite information.
We do.
And because of that, we live in an age of infinite anxiety. Analysis paralysis has never been easier or more socially acceptable to achieve.
Think about a founder today, or a writer, or anyone trying to launch a new initiative. You have access to endless data sets. You have hundreds of Silicon Valley playbooks. You have thousands of hours of podcasts, essays, and thought leadership threads on social media, all explicitly dictating exactly how to think before you are allowed to act.
It is utterly paralyzing. There is this brutal, perfect observation in the source text that says, noise masquerades as wisdom.
That's such a great line.
It really is.
Yeah.
We consume all this content, we read all the playbooks, we listen to 5 different experts debate the macroeconomic climate, and we think we are gaining wisdom. We think we are arming ourselves for battle.
Right.
But we are really just gorging on noise that makes us too terrified to ever move.
So contrast that average, overprepared, paralyzed individual with the consistent winners. The people who actually bend reality to their will.
What are they doing differently?
What do? They just move. And they do it by operating in what we can call a collapsed state.
A collapsed state, like dissolving the category we talked about with Einstein earlier.
Exactly the same thing.
The thought and the action collapse into a single point of impact.
Exactly. Let's look at Andreessen's track record as an investor again. He backs category-defining companies. But he doesn't do this by performing deeper, more agonizing pre-decision analysis than the other firms on Sand Hill Road.
He doesn't have a crystal ball.
He doesn't have a magic spreadsheet that predicts the future better than anyone else. He operates in the collapsed state.
Meaning he doesn't wait for the internal committee to unanimously agree on what the future will look like.
He reads the present moment. He reads the tangible market signals that exist today. He feels the actual physical energy of the founding team sitting across the table from him today.
The data, not the commentary.
Right. He gauges the technological timing, and he acts. He writes the check, he collapses the thought into the action, and then he lets the feedback loop of reality do the rest of the work.
It's shifting the burden of proof. You stop demanding that your imagination prove the idea will work, and you force the real world to prove whether it works or not.
That's a great way to phrase it.
I love this. It's like the intellect is fundamentally changing roles. Historically, we've treated the intellect like an armchair general, right?
The guy on the hill.
Yes, the general sits on a hill, miles away from the actual blood and mud of the battlefield. They have binoculars, they have these static paper maps, and they try to orchestrate perfect, clean movements from a completely safe distance.
And by the time the general actually sends the orders down the hill, the enemy has already moved.
Exactly. The map is outdated. But in this new model, the intellect is no longer the general. The intellect becomes the soldier on the ground.
In the mud.
The soldier is in the mud. They are highly responsive, constantly adapting, and most importantly, they are completely inseparable from the action itself.
Right.
The general thinks, then the army does. But the soldier on the ground thinks by doing.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The soldier thinks by doing. And there is a specific term in the text for this shift in cognitive strategy. They call it post-intellectualism.
Post-intellectualism, I mean, that sounds incredibly heavy. Almost like we're advocating for the death of thinking altogether. I'm guessing that doesn't just mean be stupid.
No, not at all. Post-intellectualism is absolutely not anti-intellectualism.
Okay.
It is not a rejection of intelligence or strategy. It simply means that the intellect has realized its own limitations.
It knows what it can.
Right. The intellect understands that it cannot simulate the complexities of the real world perfectly from a distance. So instead of standing outside the arena pretending to be an objective, omniscient observer, the intellect fuses with the action. It steps inside the play.
Okay, so we've established the theory. We know the winners operate in this collapsed state, fusing thought and action like a soldier in the mud.
Yes.
But I want to know about the actual mechanics of what happens when you take the leap. When you stop overthinking, when you fire the internal committee and just make a physical move, how does the universe, or the market, or the person you're talking to actually respond?
This brings us to the core mechanical truth of this entire philosophy, the physics of clarity, and specifically the concept of action as a form of inquiry.
Action as inquiry. I honestly want to carve that into my desk.
It's powerful.
Earlier, we talked about how thought is latent action. When you are standing on the edge of a decision, feeling that massive wave of uncertainty, what you are actually experiencing is just untested potential.
Yes. When you are deeply uncertain, you are simply looking at a system that has not yet been interacted with. You are staring at a locked door, and you are trying to use your intellect to think your way into knowing what is behind it.
Which is literally impossible.
Totally impossible.
You can stand there for a decade theorizing about whether a tiger or a pile of gold is behind the door. But the moment you move, the moment your hand physically turns the doorknob and pushes, the system responds.
Immediately.
Information magically appears where there was none a second ago. Constraints that you couldn't have possibly predicted in your pros and cons list become instantly visible. Opportunities that were completely hidden in the dark reveal themselves.
Because action is a literal form of inquiry. It is the act of asking a question of the universe. And here is the harsh truth. The world does not answer when you ask it questions in the language of thought.
Doesn't care about your thoughts.
It doesn't. It only answers when you ask in the language it actually speaks.
And the universe only speaks motion.
Yes.
You cannot ask the world a question by journaling about it in your bedroom. The market doesn't speak mind map. It speaks kinetic energy.
Exactly. Kinetic energy is the only vocabulary that matters.
But, and I have to throw a flag here, I can hear the anxiety delegate screaming from the back of the room again.
Uh-oh.
Action as inquiry sounds incredibly romantic. But how do you avoid just burning your life to the ground?
Right.
How do you, the listener, distinguish between using action as a smart tool for inquiry versus just acting recklessly, quitting your job with zero savings, and ruining your life because you literally didn't look before you leaped?
It is the most natural objection, and it's critical to address because this philosophy is definitely not a license for self-destruction.
Okay, so what's the safety net?
The solution to the reckless problem is to calibrate the scale of your movement. You do not ask the universe a question by throwing a live grenade at it.
Good rule of thumb.
You find the smallest viable version of the action.
The smallest viable action. This is where the rubber finally meets the road. And this brings us to the practical experiment that I want everyone listening to actually try.
Homework time.
Yes. Because talking about Einstein and Sadhguru is great, but it means absolutely nothing if it doesn't change what you do at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow.
The challenge is ruthless, but it's simple. The next time you feel that familiar, suffocating urge to figure things out, when you feel the internal committee calling an emergency session, resist the ritual.
Do not open the journal.
Sure.
Do not make the pros and cons list. Silence the internal monologue that is desperately dressing up your fear as strategy.
Just silence it.
And instead, immediately execute the absolute smallest viable version of the thing you are agonizing over. Let's unpack some highly specific examples from the text to show how this works mechanically. Example 1 chip, the imperfect prototype.
This is a classic trap for creators, engineers, and entrepreneurs. You have a project, it's, say, 80% done.
It's functional.
Right, it works. But the perfectionist in you is screaming that it needs another 6 months in the lab. If you hold it back, you are hoarding latent energy. But if you ship it today, knowing it has flaws, what actually happens?
The friction of reality hits it.
Yeah.
Users actually touch it. And suddenly, you receive immediate blunt force data.
Real data.
The users will tell you that the feature you spent 3 months agonizing over is completely irrelevant to them. And the tiny afterthought feature you almost deleted is the only reason they bought it.
Happens all the time.
You gain massive clarity, but you had to pay for it with the discomfort of releasing something imperfect.
You gain clarity through friction. Let's look at a more interpersonal example. Send the slightly awkward email.
I hate this one.
We all have that draft. It's sitting in your outbox right now. You've read it 20 times. You've changed best to thanks to sincerely and back to best.
Yes.
You are mentally simulating every possible way the recipient's amygdala could misinterpret your tone. Is this too aggressive? Am I being too passive-aggressive?
You are sitting in the cinema watching the hologram of a social rejection that hasn't actually happened.
Precisely.
But think about the physical mechanics of what happens when you finally stop thinking and just click send. The cursor disappears. The email vanishes, and your body experiences an immediate physiological release of tension.
No, huge exhale.
The latent action becomes kinetic. And almost universally, the actual reply you get 2 hours later is just, sounds good, thanks.
With a typo.
Right. The simulation of the future is always exponentially more terrifying than the physical reality.
The simulation is designed by your fear. Reality is just data. And the third example is perhaps the most visceral, make the uncomfortable call. You need to fire a vendor or break up with someone or ask for a massive favor. You just stare at the phone on your desk. You rehearse the opening line in your head until your throat literally feels tight.
But the mere physical act of picking up the phone and pressing the numbers collapses the wave function of your anxiety.
It does.
The moment you hear it ringing, the internal committee is instantly dismissed. They have no power once the action is in motion. You are no longer preparing for the moment.
Yeah.
You are inside the moment.
And the ultimate revelation that follows this experiment, whether it's the prototype, the email, or the phone call, is deeply profound. People realize that the clarity they were desperately waiting for, the clarity they thought they needed before they could move,
Yeah.
it actually arrives seconds after the first physical step.
You take the step in the dark,
Mm-hmm.
and your foot hits a floorboard, and suddenly the lights turn on.
Exactly.
What felt for weeks, or maybe even years, like an unsolvable thinking problem, reveals itself to have been an action deficit all along.
An action deficit. That is the true diagnosis of overthinking. And it perfectly completes the physics metaphor we started with. This is the mind's literal version of mass energy conversion.
The heavy, static mass of your potential thought is ignited. It becomes kinetic energy, and in the fiery process of that conversion, both are revealed to be the exact same substance.
It's beautiful.
It is an incredible way to view human agency.
It demands a complete paradigm shift. Because as we pull all these threads together, from Silicon Valley venture capital to Eastern mysticism to theoretical physics, we have to recognize that this is not just a neat productivity hack.
No, it's not a life hack.
Marc Andreessen didn't just find a new app to organize his tasks, or a better way to prioritize his calendar.
He just stopped believing in a distinction that never physically existed. He realized the mahogany table in his head was a phantom.
And Sadhguru, speaking from an ancient tradition that predates the internet by thousands of years, points to the exact same operational truth. The past is just a memory file corrupting your present processing power.
It was a ghost story.
Right. And the future is just an act of imagination creating false resistance. The only place where anything real can happen, the only place where you have any actual leverage over the physical universe, is right now in the seamless fusion of thought and action.
It's the final thematic bow of this deep dive. The old model, the idea that you must meticulously think, process, hold committee meetings, and only then are you allowed to step into the arena, is a relic.
It's outdated.
It belongs to a slower, older world where delay didn't cost you very much. But we do not live in that world. In a world defined by blazing speed, immense complexity, and constant, unpredictable change, the old model is an active, dangerous liability.
The new model is not a sequence. It is not step A followed neatly by step B. It is a fusion. You do not wait to think. You think by acting.
Which brings us right back to you, the listener, and that internal committee meeting we talked about at the very beginning. The next time you find yourself sitting paralyzed at that desk, listening to the anxiety delegate read from the minutes of a failure from 5 years ago, I want you to remember the physics of your own brain.
Fire the committee.
I want you to leave that mental room, walk out the door, and just physically do something.
Yeah.
Take the smallest viable action. Because I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over something that builds on everything we've unpacked today. If action and thought are truly the exact same substance, just in different states, then every moment you spend sitting still, paralyzed by overthinking, isn't just a minor delay in your schedule. It isn't just you being careful. It is a fundamental suppression of your own life force. You are keeping your own energy locked in a dark room. So what if the very act of trying to know yourself entirely through thinking is the exact thing preventing you from actually becoming who you are meant to be through doing?
A powerful question to carry forward into the real world.
Don't just sit there and think about it. Go find out.